Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bald Explorer live this afternoon. Apologies, I've just started the stream and then it crashed on me again. Sometimes this happens. People get in the chat and then for some reason, I don't know what it is. There is a reason, clearly. It just suddenly says it's no longer available and it just dies. And then I had to restart it. So apologies if you have had trouble finding the live stream. Obviously, if you are watching this at a later date, this is now a recorded video and you have got me in front of you, hopefully. But we'll just give people a quick chance to catch up. Hey, there we are. It must be the heat. It must be the heat. Hello to Audrey and to Turbo Stream. I saw Lee Lawson a second ago, but then it crashed. It was nothing to do with you, Lee. I'm absolutely convinced. I am hoping after this to hot-foot it over to the lovely Julia's, and we are going to do an afternoon walk rather than a morning walk. It's 29 degrees centigrade in the Shire of Birmingham. Ah, bloody hell, that's hot. Sean's allotment says, found out today that I have family in Worthing. Oh, did you not know about them? Hello to Lee again. Nice of you to drop by. Sorry about the crash earlier. And there's the lovely Julia. So yes, looking forward to meeting up with the lovely Julia after this recording. I should be hot-footing to there, and we're off to do a quick afternoon walk because it's too hot in the day. I didn't go out this morning because I recorded another My Story, more memories from the old Voba Bank, the memory bank. Ben Reeve, currently 31 degrees in Stokenchurch. Blimey. And sizzling good afternoon, says Michael. Yep, it certainly is hot. Looking down on the Met Office website, it's not actually going to rain tomorrow. I was hoping it was going to rain. It just says potential thunderstorms. Thunderstorms. I'm not sure what a thunderstorm is. Oops, sorry. My glasses continually don't sit. I need to get new glasses. These frames are completely buggered. They are actually broken, and you may often see a little white bit of. I'm going to say this now in all the videos. You'll see. Oh yeah, it's got a bit of white tissue paper in there holding them together. It's because if I don't have it, they just splay out so wide that they fall off. Especially if you've got the slightest bit of sweat on you, or if you're walking about in hot weather, they just pink. I seem to have got a little bit of hay fever in my. I've got a restricted voice for some reason. Why do people say for some reason? Clearly, it is for some reason. I pick myself up on these ridiculous expressions which actually mean nothing. But yes, I have. There is a reason, but I do not know what it is. I would like to be able to think more before I speak so that I don't use those phrases such as kind of, sort of, some reason, these idiotic words that one doesn't need to use to fill up the sentence just to keep talking, I think. Anyway, Dan Vickery, hi from Algonac. I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced, but I'm very rubbish at pronouncing words that I have never met before. Algonac in Michigan. Lovely to have you join us. Turbo says, I need rain for my allotment. Well, it may well rain in Birmingham. 31 degrees in the shade in Lancing, says the lovely Julia. In the shade? What is it? In the sun? Dan Vickery says, marsh here looks like your east coast. Here at the St. Clair Flats, there is good sailing. Ooh, lovely. Be nice to be sitting on a nice sailing boat now on a calm, placid sea, not having to do anything. Local honey is good for hay fever. I don't know where I would get local honey in Worthing. There must be beekeepers that sell it, I suppose. At the end of the day is another worthless saying. It's a friend of mine would always say, if anyone said, well, you know, at the end of the day, he would come in and go, it gets dark. Of course, there are certain parts in the world where that's not actually true. Says Dan Vickery. Okay. Is a, yes, sorry. Is a word that, yes. Actually, it's funny that, because I don't mind people who say and because that's an indication that they're thinking of something to say, rather than putting in sort of, kind of, is another one. You know what I mean? Kind of. I went to the beach and I'm trying to think of an example now. And I kind of went on the pier. What do you mean you kind of went on? Either you went on the pier or you didn't go on the pier. You can't kind of, unless you were climbing on the side and you were almost on and almost off. Wondering where the story today down on the farm. Oh, yes. Had a very interesting email from Linda Kane, who has yet to arrive. Or if she's there, she hasn't said hello. Who told me in her email, she told me and revealed who Lady, as I was calling her, Lady Soon, but I think it's Lady Sun, or somebody else gave me a different pronunciation. I would so move a behoove or two for personal use only, so they get to thrive. It's very hot. Nigel sadly says, I found one room at work which feels like 10 degrees centigrade. It's wonderful. Gosh, I make frequent visits. Why don't you base yourself in there? I am ummable person, says Michael. Silent pause is really nice. Yeah, trouble with silent pauses, of course, is that people jump in, don't they? If you're in a conversation and you go to pause, somebody else thinks, oh, that's the time for me to start speaking. Popular saying in Wales, it's in me. So I've got to say that. It's in me. Oh, what's a popular? Oh, at the end of the day, is that what you mean? Love beehive, and I don't mean the hairdo, says the lovely Julia. I'm a person. I blame watching too much of Fred Dibner, says Ben Reeve. There you go. Right, shall we get on with the reading? Sorry, I'm aware that my voice is a bit croaky, and I'm not sure why, but hey-ho. Chapter 23, I Learn Many Things. The meadow, which during the summer was covered by rushes, and also which was said to be the best grazing, was let to a village butcher for 10 shillings a week. In the old days, this meadow was said to have fatted bullocks left on it, each with its round cast-iron bowl for a daily ration of linseed cake. It was a weekly letting, for I was going to pay away. What do you mean? For I was going to pay away no more year's rent as disturbance. Mr. Stubberfield had sent me a formal claim for the year's rent for disturbing the farming activities of my late tenant, and an interesting document it was too. To H.W. Williamson, Esquire, Creek, Norfolk. As trustee under a deed of assignment executed by Mr. S. Strawless, I hereby give you notice that I claim compensation under Section 12 of the Agricultural Holdings Act 1923 for the loss and expense incurred by me in quitting the Old Castle Farm situate in the parish of Creek in the county of Norfolk, namely as follows. 1. Loss upon sale of implements of husbandry, £35. Loss of sale of 6 horses, 4 head of neat stock, and 66 pigs, £57. Loss upon sale of certain fixtures, £6. Expenses preparing claim for compensation, £4. Total, £102. Claim 1 year's rent of holding, £100. 2 or 3 times a week I set out with the lorry and some ropes and found my way to auction sales, sometimes as far as 50 miles distant. Gradually I overcame my nervousness of being considered a mug or ignoramus, and if I wanted information, I didn't hesitate to ask for it. The procedure at the auctions was always the same. In a grass field near the building, the lots would be laid out, beginning with heaps of old iron and wood, old drums, broken hurdles and sacks. Gradually the condition and value of the lots improved. Ladders, bins, fowl houses, and so to the implements, double-breasted road wagons on iron arms, harvest wagons, four-wheeled trolley on springs, tumbrils, corn elevators, three-wheeled iron water carts, 12 or 18 or 23 coulter disc corn drills, grass mowers, hoes, etc. I don't think you need an etc. after that long list. When the implements were sold, there was usually an interval for lunch, when one sought out the beer and the sandwich laid out on a trestle table in perhaps the cart hovel or the open shed. Afterwards, a handbell was rung by a man in a long overall cotton coat, and followed by the auctioneer, we would go to the ring where the horses were to be sold. After the horses, the cows and calves and pigs, and last of all, the hens. Usually I came back with some implement or article, the use of which I was not quite clear about, but Bob had told me what to go after, and usually I didn't have any difficulty in finding it and judging its condition. If I were in doubt, I would ask somebody standing by, and invariably I got good advice. But it was a cold-footed job, standing about in the bleak wind, with often a rushed, half-eaten breakfast left behind to get there in time. At this period, I used to have about 100 letters a week, most of them inspired by the newspaper articles from young men wanting to share my adventurous life. One or two came down, but after a day on the concrete mixer, for we snatched days on the slabs between auctions, they went home again. They found me bleak as the weather. I had no inclination to discuss ideas with them, having my own fixed conviction about what was needed to alter the social fabric of Britain. Some of my visitants were theoretical communists, full of praise for Russia, while I thought the communist ideology was dated 19th century. I had ceased to feel energetic about it. Even enthusiastic about it 10 years before. Anyhow, I wanted to get the farm in order, and I had no time for debating. After a while, getting used to the auctions, my diffidence about being able to compete with red-faced, solid-looking men began to leave me. I discovered that most of them were like myself, a bit apprehensive of being run. Even the old iron merchants, usually called diddycoys because of their gypsy-like appearance, became my friends. They usually wore the same sort of clothes, black felt hats, dark trousers with a hint of bell-bottom, and high-buttoning dark jackets. They came in old lorries and were often seen after the auction loading up masses of ancient wire netting, broken wheels, rusty implements, and anything else which had fallen to them for a shilling or two. Some of them had wives and babies with them, sitting in the lorry cabs while the men peered and poked with their sticks, turning over the stuff to scrutinise it. At one sale, an amusing thing happened. I arrived late, just as one of the diddycoys was about to break up a Cambridge or rib roll with a sledgehammer. A rib roll is made up of anything between 2 or 4 dozen cast iron wheels with pointed rims on a common axle. I didn't know then what its function was on arable land: to press down the furrows, to close the air spaces, and to crack the heavy clods before making the seedbed. It was useful also for rolling wheat in the spring, to consolidate the roots of the plants in soil made puffy by frost. I had not bought one, as they weighed anything up to a ton, and the idea of pulling one to pieces, wheels and heavy axle and cast iron side pieces to which the wooden frame shafts were fitted, made me flinch. I would have to get one, however, and at the previous day's auction had seen one go for £18, when, therefore, I arrived on the frozen field of the next sale and saw a gypsy about to smash one up with an iron hammer. I went up and said, in the phrase I'd learned from listening to others, "Want to take a profit on it?" He stopped his swing and replied, "Yeah, what will you offer for it?" I made a calculation on the basis of old iron. Rear armament had put up the price to about 3 shillings a hundredweight. There were 21 wheels. Usually a wheel weighed about a hundredweight. These wheels looked heavier than the ordinary ones I'd seen, so probably being 6 stone each. Then there was the axle too. I'll give you 30 bob. It's a deal. As he struck my arm, a custom, I observed. What was the origin of... It's a deal, as he struck my arm, a custom I had observed. Was this the origin of the phrase, striking a bargain? Later, I wondered how I was going to get it home. Wouldn't it have been wiser to have bought a new one with proper tractor hitch and to have paid for it by writing 2 articles in the comfort in a hired house? Here I was, rushing about, feeding improperly, almost permanently querulous, except when sitting in front of the fire after a meal, sipping a cup of tea and my feet warm before the stove. Why had I bought the beastly thing? Well, 'cause you're an idiot, clearly. During the beer and sandwich interval, the diddy-coy came up to me and said, "Like to make a profit on your rib roll? I'll give you £0.50 for it." £0.50? Why, one like this sold to 18 quid at Sholdham yesterday. Yeah, that had a tractor hitch. Would you take £1 for profit? I shook my head. Look here, we know each other. Will you take 10 bob profit? What would you say if I asked you for 5 quid for it? A man was in the offing. I knew he had asked the chap to buy it for him. The diddycock went to him and then returned. 5 quid, did you say? Yes, only I didn't say I'd sell it. I asked, what would you say if I asked a fiver? Blast, you're a hot 'un, governor. Won't you sell it for 5 quid? No, I want it. OK, but do you mind me asking? Certainly not. Have a fag. After that, it was worthwhile giving him 2 bob to take the roll apart and get his mates to heave it up onto the lorry, which they did expertly, knowing exactly how to get it on by rolling up the shafts using 2 shepherd's iron bars from an adjacent lot. Afterwards, an ancient corn dresser, 8 shillings, harness, £3, 3 shillings, and plough chains, 11 shillings, was loaded. Then I went home. At 2 p.m. I was met by Messrs. Barkway and Stubberfield for the valuation of ingoing covenants. I arrived in time to have lunch of egg and bacon with Anne in the granary. I was pleased with my rib roll, which I would get the blacksmith to fit with a tractor hitch. Anne looked happy too. The cars of the valuers were drawn up outside the corn barn when I got there. Mr. Stubbyfield had a new car, nearly as smart as Mr. Barkway's. As Mr. Barkway had told me in a letter, the previous year had been the worst that he had known for farming, which meant extra activity for auctioneers at both sales and valuations. In an age of flourishing agriculture, the services of valuers would be not in such great demand. Their ruling was absolute. Before a farmer could get a valuer to act for him, he had to sign a blue paper form giving him full powers to act on his behalf and to abide by all and any of his decisions. The farmer was not upset to see any details. The farmer was not supposed to see any details or to inquire how any total sum was made up. The reason for this was obviously to avoid what otherwise might be endless arguments and controversy. Mr. Strawless's steward came with us, carrying a dung fork with ashen handle stained by much thrusting into heaps. We all walked to the lower yard. Mr. Barkway produced a measuring tape. Mr. Stubbyfield held one end, while Mr. Barkway ran it out to the other end. They measured the distance in yards. Both agreed it was 12. Then they measured in the breadth. Afterwards, Mr. Barkway pushed the handle of the three-pronged dung fork into the middle of the heap and trod round it. Mr. Stubberfield withdrew the handle, and they agreed and noted in their books the depth of the mud heap. The handle was pushed down in 2 other places, and agreement reached about the depths there. There was a second and third heap in the yard, which were measured in the same way, after which we walked up to the hill to look at the haystacks on 21 acres. These stacks were of red clover and Italian ryegrass. I had shot rabbits in the hayfield during the summer. The clover had been patchy, a poor growth. The ryegrass, when cut, was long and overripe. Such food was stalky, indigestible. It was third-rate hay, not worth more than 30 shillings a ton, according to the manager of a big farm, who recently had looked over the farm with me. Most of its valuable green colouring matter had been bleached out of it. I had helped to get it in when cut and over-dried. There were many docks in it. The steward had told me to bite the blackish knots of a stalk and taste the sugar. The seeds shook out of the head and fell on the ground. Bob had told me that he had not cut it before because it was ripe. Had not cut it before it was ripe because the idea had been to get the biggest bulk in order to increase its valuation price. Someone had made a deep cut about 2 feet wide from the top to bottom in the first rick. Thus the quality and density of the hay within was exposed. Mr. Barkway pulled a handful, sniffed it, passed it to Mr. Stubberfield, who also sniffed it. Then Mr. Barkway climbed up to the top with surprising agility. He got there by digging his toes into the pressed layers of hay and working himself up by his elbows. The hay for the first 3 feet down the rick was darkish where wet had penetrated. I remembered that the rick had stood unthatched from June till September. Well, it would be the last neglected rick on Old Castle Farm. While standing up there, Mr. Barkway pulled the tape from its leather case, and the rick was measured from peak to base. Afterwards he got down, and it was measured and checked in depth and length. The 2 remaining ricks were treated the same way, and notes were made in the valuer's books. Then, as we walked through the roots of old mangold and swede in 14 acres and examined them, Mr. Barkway said that an allowance would have to be made for the unexhausted manures which they had grown. There was a standard table of such values. Thus, the value of farmyard manure remaining after one season was 50%, while 75% of the superphosphate remained in the soil for the benefit of the succeeding crop. The usual thing is to allow for this when the receipt of the merchant who supplied the artificials is produced, he said. No idea what any of this means, by the way. After notes had been made in the little books, we walked down to the new house. No, we didn't. We walked down to the new road between 14 acres and 21 acres. The hay is yours, said Mr. Barkway. So are the roots. You may lift them as soon as you wish. Also, the muck is yours. How are you getting on? Oh, bit by bit, or littles by littles, as my steward says. After a pause, I made myself say, by the way, can you tell me about the estimate for the repairs which you wrote and said had been put out? It was some weeks since the contractor looked over the place with me, and the broken doors do let in wind rather badly. Oh, didn't I let you know? I'm sorry about that. Let me have a look now. He frowned to remember. Let's see. Materials £48, labour 57, gates posts £16, labour 13. You'll have to pay for the materials, of course. The labour will be deducted from the covenants, which we value today. I'll be coming round shortly to estimate the deterioration to the farm. I expect it will offset, even exceed, the value of the covenants, that is. It will have to go to arbitration, of course. I'll let you know when I'm coming. Well, good luck with the farming. I returned to look at my haystacks. I pulled a handful from the first stack and sniffed it, and then bit at the joint to taste the sugar. My first haystack. I climbed up the crevice, kicking my toes into the side, as Mr. Barkway had done. I must get Bob to thatch over the crevice to prevent further spoliation by rain. I made a note of it, and then walked among the roots. A hare sat up, its black-tipped ears erect. Then it bent down and loped away. How long since I had shot a hare? 18 years up in Yorkshire in 1919. Mr. Barkway had told me that hares did much damage. They were numerous. In old days, farmers used to have hare hunts with guns and dogs to keep them down. I thought of the children and the small pack of beagles myself as huntsmen with horns stuck between first and second brass button of my waistcoat, but that was another fancy. Heavens, I must go down. I must do some writing. When would the drains in the yards left by Sam be finished? And the concrete slabs by the cowhouse, when would they be laid? I saw Bob near the cowhouse and asked him to get the canvas thatched. The crevice thatched on the rick. He replied that no one else did that. I said I wanted the hay to be protected. It wouldn't take harm by the rain, said Bob. Could he thatch? Not properly, but father could, he said. Would he then ask Jimmy? Yes, he would ask him. He asked Jimmy, and Jimmy replied, "What do you want to do that for? Won't take harm, just that little bit." Well then, I said, feeling the weariness at the reception coming over me, do you mind doing it? No, of course not. You're the boss, replied Bob. We'll do it if you order us to do it. But we ought to be thinking about getting in the beet. The beet? What beet? The beet in 14 acres. We ought to make a pie of it. A pie? You know, a pie we call it, said Bob, looking a bit worried. For the frost, he added. What ought we to do with the roots, Bob? Do with them? He looked puzzled. Do you mean we should sell them? No. We ought to have them on the farm. I don't want to sell anything like that. We must keep them. We must keep all the hay, straw, and roots. Oh, I see. Shall I get them up in a pie? I don't know what you mean by in a pie. Oh, it's a big heap. Oh, I see. A clamp. Yeah, that's it, said Bob. Only here we call it a pie. The Swedes now, we don't take no harm in. They won't take no harm in the frost, but the beet will. So I think we ought to get 'em up, don't you, and cover them with straw. We've got to thresh Strawless's corn stacks, you know, and the straw is ours for threshing. That's the custom in these parts. Yes, Mr. Barkway told me that. But first we ought to finish the concrete, don't you think? Don't you think, before the frost comes? Otherwise we can't work on it. Just as you say, replied Bob. Oh, there's another thing. We ought to get some of the fields ploughed for the frost. That's heavy old land on Hang High and Fox Covert, and the frost works down in the furrows, if you see what I mean. Yeah, we ought to get some horses too, I said. Yeah, I was going to ask you about horses. And there's the trumbles. We want to cart the beet, and also the corn. We need to thresh them. We also want some sacks too, and you ought to get some coal. And can I borrow a water cart? I must order the tractor too. I ought to get a petrol pump with a large tank. It's cheaper to buy in bulk. A seed drill too. Mr. Barkway says it's cheaper to buy implements new if one can afford it. You won't get so good ploughing by tractors as with horses. And my old single furrow plough, said Bob earnestly. Those tractors don't cut the thistles, and they score the land, bibble it like, round the headlands. You won't do better than horses. But horses can't plough up hilly Pierce, I said. Yes, sir, said Bob, with a throw-up of one shoulder. Easy. Why, under Strawless I ploughed, cultivated, harrowed and drilled all the arable land, just me and a single farrow and 2 horses. Sometimes I went out for weeks on end just ploughing and never see another bloke. I got fed up, I did sometimes, but I loved the land, you know. I wouldn't do no other job. That's born in a chap, I reckon. Do you think that we shall make a profit, Bob? Blast, yes, easy. Strawless didn't lose his money farming, I reckon. He used to go off to Scotland to shoot and race in these here small boats in the summer, he was. He made a good living out of this farm, course he did. But about ploughing, Bob, do you really think horses are enough on a farm? Course I do, sir. Bob usually threw in a sir once a day. You can't beat horses ploughing. But Hilly Pierce was never ploughed properly. I saw it in 1936 and 1937. It was a frightful sight. Well, I had to slobber over it to get by. I knew it wasn't proper work. Course I did. It's supposed to be in the small seeds now, isn't it? There's hardly a plant of clover or ryegrass in the stubble, and the stubble is 90% thistle stalks. The seeds failed. That's a rum 'un to get on a seed bed. They sowed small seeds the year you came first, you know, and they didn't take. Birds got 'em or something. It's an old sud, that field. My horses used to sweat drawing a single furrow and stand still 6 times going up. Course, the poor beggar was usually only fed a bit of old hay and a mangold or 2, but we could never do anything with Hilly Pierce. You've got to catch it right, and then put 6 teams on it all at once for the morning. For one morning it's too slippery, turns up like a liver, or a river maybe, and next time it's as hard as rock. In those days, you know, they ploughed it in teams with bullocks. Very slow it was, but they got it done. Fat as butter they were, all lime seed cake put into them, and then off to market, 11 or 1200 weight each. You'll do no good with a tractor up there. I've seen them trying to tackle it with more than once, and digging themselves in and turning it over backwards. Waste of money, I reckon. I was beginning to experience the conservatism of the labourer's mind. I was beginning to experience the I can't say the word, of the labourer's mind. Jimmy had criticised the concrete slabs as dead money. The horses would slip down and break their knees. What do you want to do is spend all that money for? That was all right before. All this fancy work won't pay for itself. That's my way of thinking. You'll see, Jimmy, I said. Said Jimmy. Your larn, governor. Your larn, L-A-R-N. Your larn, governor. And that is the end of that chapter. Cool, blimey. All that dialogue, which I enjoyed doing, out of yards and yards of very few bits of dialogue. And my voice, ladies and gentlemen, is a bit sore. Diddycoys. Yeah, that's what he called them. Excuse me. Richard referred to your email, Linda. Oh, hello, Linda. I referred to, I can't remember what you said, Lady Suni, or whatever her name was. It wasn't the Mitford girls, basically, but it was a local Lady Toff, I think, who had some association with, as we said, Oswald Mosley. George Henry, how far are you from Saginaw, Dan Vickery? I don't know. Dan Vickery. Oh, Dan Vickery. How far are you? Silent pause. Oh, yeah. It's a mask for the Dowager Countess of Down, who was a member of the British Union of Fascists. I don't really know. Very enjoyable today, Richard. Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, I don't really know too much about the black shirts and the fascists and the Oswald Mosley. I remember reading something about it, and I can't recall, but I remember that some parts of it seemed to be quite reasonable, like all extremes. Parts of their manifesto or objectives are reasonable, which I suppose is the things people push to get people in, and then other things are the unreasonable bits that you probably in a civilized world wouldn't want to go to. But I can't remember exactly much about that, and indeed the time, but it is something I'd like to learn about. I will try a bit more. As you can hear, my voice is very strained. I don't know whether it's just a little cold or hay fever or whatever. Feeling a little bit strained. Might be a second bout of COVID, for all I know. I'm convinced that I had a very mild bit of COVID at the beginning. It came and went. And I don't think it was terribly vicious or frightening. Just look and see how... Oh, I'm very tired. Right, I'll try this chapter. There's quite a bit of it. I've got to whiz off early today because I'm off to do a video. Chapter 24. I buy horses and acquire some straw. The greatest difficulty during the first months of my new career of farming lay within myself. When I began the new life, I had already been a writer for almost 20 years. For 20 years, my mind had been set to create imaginatively. If I'd not been actually writing, I'd been thinking of what I should write. I'd been living, often intensely, in my imagination. My mind was set that way. When I started farming, therefore, I was ill-equipped in more ways than one. In my mind, I could create a field of corn out of the wilderness. I could make a word picture of it, the silky grey wind wave of the midsummer barley, the rustle of yellowing oats, the stiffer sway of wheat, the lark singing in the sky, and the kestrel shadow moving down the grass of the windy hill. Even the sphere of the country things imagination was strong. Even in the sphere of the country things imagination. Yeah, but you can't write so that you can read out loud, mate. Even in the sphere of country things, imagination was stronger than reality. Thus, people sometimes told me it seemed strange that I didn't appear to enjoy actual country scenes, such as sunset, moonlight over the river, or the Severn Sea from the great cliffs above Linton. I lived in the past too much, some of the critics said. Actually, I was living in the scenes I would use for my books. For years, writing had been for me a whole-time job, and I was not much good at anything else, if indeed I was good for that. So when I started farming, my mind was not adjusted to the plan of action. It was not patient. It raced ahead of the present. It anticipated its desires. It was too quick and varied for those working with me, and its imaginative speed was inevitably frustrated by the more deliberate slowness. It was one thing to imagine a farm with perfect roads, buildings in fine condition, implements always efficient and aligned in rows, sacks always folded tidily, every rat hole stopped, and not one grain of wheat spoiled by so much as a mouse. and another to see, as I did on my farm all the time, dereliction, mud, weeds, dilapidated buildings, swarms of rats, broken tiles, rotten floors, decayed and flapping doors, swampy meadows, cracked bridges, flat gates, and overgrown hedges. Sometimes I found reality temporarily unbearable. The gulf between aspiration and reality was too great. After each day's work, I sat before a little stove in the granary, too tired to take my wet boots off and my puttees, but I must get myself together for my other work and forced myself to write. In those old days I'd often written all night, but now I could not go on beyond midnight. I knew when it rained, because the rusty vane down the pipe stove glistened and the hove hissed. Often I rose from my desk in mental dejection, even misery. Dejection. Before a fortnight. Oh, I've got gunk on my. Feeble excuse, but it's true. About a fortnight before Christmas, after an appeal from Mr. Stubberfield to help him in his difficult position as trustee of the old tenant's affairs, I gave up work on the cottages and prepared to thresh the corn. I hoped that a new tractor, ordered without demonstration or inspection of any kind, would arrive in time for the threshing. We had 2 horses, but they were not enough to do the 2 jobs, bringing the corn down the steep, slippery land of Hilly Peace to the barn and taking up water. I had found out, sorry, my throat. Pleasant. I had found out that the same steam engine would use 400 gallons a day, which meant hauling up 4,000 pounds a day from the river to Hang High Field. And the only water cart I had was a rickety affair of wobbly iron wheels and diminutive tank body, which sloped most of the 80-gallon contents over the sides as it lurched between Gilbert, the black horse. The 2 new tumbrils had arrived. They were nearly 6 feet wide. One was 9 feet long, the other 9 feet 6 inches. They had horse shafts designed for quick removal and iron tractor hitches to fit in their place. The idea was to draw the muck up the steep hills by tractor, then hand over to the horses while taking back the empty tumbril waiting on the high ground. They looked to be splendid vehicles, shining with varnish over their red and green paint, my name and village in white letters on the side. Their new rubber wheels would halve the back-breaking labour of horses on the hilly land. I took Bob in the Silver Eagle to an auction to buy the horses. At the other auctions it was a trepidant time for me. All the hard-faced dealers were there, and the farmer whose sale it was probably looked around to spot buyers, estimate their temperaments, and put bids against them. Bob was cool and calculating, sparrow hawk-eyed. Myself, nervously nose-poking up at the guineas, while the old fear returned on me. Was I making a fool of myself? 30.5 guineas. Trot her out again. There's a fine mare, gentlemen, Blossom by name, who'll fill her up. Make it 31 guineas. Going for 30.5 guineas. Going for 30.5 guineas. For the last time, I'm gonna sell her for 30.5 guineas. The stick fell. He looked at me. I called out my name, and Blossom, chestnut mare, aged, stinted to Mr. Walker's horse, Polcombe Pioneer, was mine. Then Gilbert was lumbering round the ring, black gelding, 9 years old. He was thin as an old crow. Blast, I like him, muttered Bob, chewing a fag end. Go on, get him. Go on, get him. You're all right. Go on. I won't see you wrong. Blast, I like that horse. You can go £20 safe. At 28 guineas, Gilbert was mine. In a large van, they arrived home. A week later, the lice in the stables, dormant since last Michaelmas, were breeding on their coats. We rubbed linseed oil onto them to induce the parasites to become vegetarians, and then washed off the gluted bodies with paraffin and water. Meanwhile, Blossom could not eat her crushed oats and chaff. She had lampus, or swelled gums. Also, the horses were continually stamping. Indeed, while trying to sleep in the granary, which adjoined the stables, I heard them banging away on the cobbles for most of the night. For about a year, during my service in the army, I'd been an infantry transport officer in charge of about 70 horses and mules on the old Somme battlefield, and I knew all about mud rash, lice, mites, and greasy heel. Then I suggested that the stamping should be cured. When I suggested that the stamping should be cured, I found that the knowledge of the possible existence of mites in the skin of a horse's legs had not yet apparently travelled as far as the village. That's in the blood. Horses always stamp, you know, said Bob. I agree that such things are in their blood, or rather sucking it, and that's why they stamp. We ought to clip the hair and then wash the legs with strong disinfectant. I never seen it done, demurred Bob. Very well then, to get you convinced, I'll get the vet. You'll believe him. Well, that'll cost you a lot of money. It'll save shoes being kicked off anyway. Blossom's only done that once, and it was an old shoe. But it's wrong to have lousy horses. What do you think I am? Who do you think I am? Strawless? I'm going to get this farm in a decent state. That's why I've brought it. That's why I've bought it. I'll ask the vet to come. The veterinary surgeon arrived with gag, twitch, and enormous forceps, and having pulled one tooth of Blossom's and rasped the others, gave us mercuric ointment to be rubbed on Gilbert's leg. I bought a clipper, which the vet recommended using before giving the 3 washings at 5 days intervals to kill the new hatched mites. On the next rainy day, when we could not work with the concrete mixer, I asked the men to begin creosoting the woodwork of the stable buildings, and was told, it was becoming a matter of course, that no one else did such things. Well, I'm going to do such things. Here's a pail, here's a brush, and here's a drum of creosote. I'll go and get 2 more pails and brushes. That evening, the ancestral colonies of rice in the ranks of the posts were killed, and the next day, as it was still raining, the beetle maggots, which were eating the heart out of the beams and rafters, joined the lice. Blast, that looks good now, I'll admit, said Bob, adding, perhaps you're right to spend the money on all these jobs, but father and me don't want to see you go wrong. I appreciate that, Bob, and I assure you I'm not going wrong. There's nothing coming in, if you see what I mean, he replied, looking worried. It's all pay, and I know bad work when I sees it, and some of them will think you don't know. Some of them will be glad to see you go bust, he went on doggedly. I don't like to hear it. Well, he knows what he's about, they say, and it worries me. Don't let it worry you, Bob. In 3 or 4 years' time, this farm won't be recognisable. The night before threshing, I sat before the stove, wet because for the past 6 hours I've been trying to make a 2-stroke engine and a piston pump outfit brought as one unit to do its job of pumping up water to the new artisan well. The well had been sunk below the chalk quarry during July by a local well sinker, 75 feet at 9 shillings a foot. My idea was to load an empty 150-gallon sherry cask on the trailer, which I brought from Devon, fill the cask with water, then draw it up by tractor up Hilly Pierce, roll it off the trailer, ready for the threshing engine, then return for the second cask. I worked by the light of a hurricane lamp for several hours trying to fix this. For some reason, the new engine would not fire. There, I said it, for some reason. Told you. For some reason, the new engine would not fire. Then when it did start, amidst clouds of arid blue smoke, the pump would not draw water. There was an air leak somewhere in the union with the flexible rubber pipes. Covering the outfit with sacks, I left it there. Anyway, the tractor had not arrived, so even if I'd been able to fill the casks, I would not have been able to draw them up to the scene of the threshing. While I sat there was a knock at the door. "Come in," I called. We had a new door now, which kept all the draughts out. The steward came in. "We shan't be in no muddle over the water," he said. "I've seen Farmer Oldman. He's a decent chap, and we will lend us his water cart. If the new tractor arrives tomorrow morning, can we pull up the water? I've got a scoop, but we can fill the water cart from the river. Blast, I don't like to punish the horses up that steep hill. You don't have to worry. I've got extra men. May I borrow a horse? There'll be 3 if the tractor don't arrive. I'll see you right." Too weary even to remove wet boots and puttees, too tired to do anything but sag in the chair and stare at the stove with its pipe sticking out of the loose tiles above, its flames and smoke sometimes pouring into the room, I sat there all night. It was blowing half a gale outside and raining hard, as I knew from the glistening snake of water moving down the stovepipe. It was about 6 the next morning when I went out. The horses were watered, fed, groomed by the light of the swinging lantern. At breakfast, I took the lorry to the station. The tractor hadn't come. Using the borrowed horse, Bob and Norman filled the water cart in the river, then the slow heaving, a straining plod up the 1 in 3.5 gradient of Hilly Pierce. The 50-year-old engine had arrived the day before. The 50-year-old engine had arrived the day before, drawing thresher and elevator. 25 tons, puffing and jolting, slowly leaving torn tracks in the thistle stubble. The borrowed water cart was a coffin-shaped iron tank on 3 small but heavy iron wheels, 2 behind and 1 in front. Its weight sank into the stubble up to the axles. It became a plough, scarcely to be pulled by 3 horses. Could they do it? It was murderous work up that hill in the rain. What a thirst the engine had! 2 tons of water for 1 sack of corn. From first light to last light, save for the half hour for lunch, which habitually was 40 minutes, 9 men worked up there on Hang High Field, in the northeast wind which blew steam white and ragged from the engine. Straw stack rose as corn stack shrunk. Rats ran out, seeds of dock, charlock and other weeds, enough to fill 8 tumbrils, made a large pyramid under the thresher. The drum roared mildly. Yellow grains fell silently into the sacks. Old Billy, one of the original road makers, tended to the coulder or husk to windward, and was feathery grey from eyebrows to the sack-wrapped legs, a grey fluffy figure covered in thistle seed. Snow flurried out of the sky. Wild ducks and curlew hurried over. The world became white. Still the work went on, and the snow became rain, and the great ruts leading over the stubble field became black again. I thought the rubber tyres would bulge off coming down the side of Hilly Pierce, tumbrils loaded with 20 sacks weighing 2 tons. I determined to cut a road along the side of the hill by next harvest. Nearly there. 3 days later, the threshing was done. Nearly 500 coombe of barley was heaped, each field separate because it was of different quality, on the asphalt barn floors. The market value was between £600 and £700. On the fourth morning I went to the station in the lorry with Bob to fetch the new tractor. At the station I sent a telegram to Devon telling the family to come up 2 or 3 days before Christmas. We would all live in the granary. If the cottages weren't finished by Christmas Eve, they must remain unfinished. The rebuilding had already cost over £550, to which must be added a £200 of the original cost. The woodwork was unpainted, the walls rough with plaster. In some rooms, the original dirty, scaly plaster remained. There were no drains, no cesspit. Bug houses had become Williamson's folly. And that's the end of that chapter. And the end of my voice, by the sounds of it. Thank you very much for coming along, ladies and gentlemen. Lots of very enjoyable. It's just allergies and or dry air. Yeah, hopefully it will be gone. Yay, horse shopping. Oh, horse shopping. Right, that's it. I've got to go and get myself organised and get over to Julia's place to pick her up shortly. So I'm going to disappear now, and I will catch up with you tomorrow. It's Thursday today, isn't it? And we will read the next chapter, in which he says, chapter 25, the first furrow. We're over halfway. It's a saga. That's what it is. It's a bloody saga. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, Ernie, and everybody else. Enjoyed that, says Linda Kane. We were mesmerised today. Enjoy your walk with TLJ. Do my best. Yes, all bunged up. So a bit of fresh air, hopefully a bit cooler, would be good. Right, where's my mouse? There he is. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.